Welcome to Forum Fridays, bakers. Last day of the week. Before we break for the weekend, we are going to check in with Mark Flarkey and let's see what's happening at the forums. Welcome, Mark.
Hi there, welcome.
Hello.
Glad to see you again.
Nice to see you. What's going on at the forums? Bakerpedia.
Well, what was happening yesterday, Len? Let's hear about
Yeah, it was such a great session. It was a Q&A roundtable with Keith Fornick from Lalaman, and we answered probably close to 30 questions on
That's awesome.
bread and shelf life. And one of the questions that really still stuck with me was that Grinch question. And we didn't know what was a Grinch on a baguette. Probably it was someone from France or, a foreign language. So what is a Grinch?
Well, it turns out it is the way when you slash the baguette, the way it opens up and creates a smile. Some people call it an ear, like in artisan bread baking. So it's not much that an enzyme really could help with. It has more to do with the skill of slashing.
Yeah.
Hot oven and lots of steam.
Hot oven. The oven needs to be hot for that thing to burst open.
Yep.
So that's awesome. So we had over 150 signups.
Excellent.
Highest attendees ever. And everybody was so engaged in asking the right kinds of questions. And really, really happy with the session yesterday. And our next one's going to be in a few weeks. So sign up if you want to join us for the sourdough session sponsored by Abel and Schaefer. And I'm so excited to see their lab. They're going to be sourdough baking. So, Mark, what's happening on the forums? I see a question on soy milk, using soy milk for.
Yes, yeah. So there's a question from Cheryl, and she wanted. First of all, she sort of started off asking if soy is found naturally in soybeans or if it's commercially added, and it is in soybeans naturally. It's extracted from soybeans. It's part of the process of when the bean is crushed and the oil is extracted, and it is then degummed, which is removing the lecithin from the oil. And once upon a time, it was an undesired byproduct. And so today, of course, it's highly sought after.
Yeah,
because she was comparing soy milk. Sorry,
we don't want this lecithin product in the oil. It's gummy.
And it shortens the shelf life of the oil as well, right?
Wow.
So it doesn't help much, right? So she was asking because she was comparing different brands of soy milk powder, and she was wondering if she could use that to get emulsification in replacing eggs. And she might be able to get some of it, but there's, in the soy milk powder, there's going to be so little lecithin, it's not going to be really effective. It should be better off looking at like a lecithinated soy flour or lecithin itself directly. It's just depending on their facility, it's not always the easiest to work with. It's a sticky, thick fluid product. Alternately, there is powdered lecithin out there, which is a little more expensive, but it has flowability. It pours like powder, like flour, and it works very well as well. So that's kind of the questions that Cheryl had on soy lecithin. And then from there, we got some really interesting, is kind of not necessarily baking specific, but because it's wheat related, is we believe it's got to do with seitan, which is high
that is the
protein type.
Right.
Some people call it mock turkey or things like that.
Chicken mock duck. I think that is a trend right now in the industry in the food industry, because people are looking for high protein food. And that's the best way is to wet wash flour to get the gluten, right?
Yes, on a small
For the
quantity scale,
seitan.
it's an easy way of doing it. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really just easy. Just isn't it? You just plop it into water and just wash it out.
You just basically wash out all the starch. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And then that's the seitan that it can use.
Yeah.
What's the particular question on that?
Well, they're asking about the if there's a list of the various flours and the percentage of gluten yield after washing, um, and essentially, wheat being a natural product,
Yeah.
the protein amount it varies from crop to crop,
Yeah,
as
but just
we
like
all
a couple
familiar
of
with crop
percent though, right?
changeover. So, but the amount of protein is the amount of gluten you would wash out.
Right. So
So
usually it will be what, somewhere between 11 to 14%, you think?
yeah, on a bread flour is going to be typically 11 to 14%.
Okay.
Um, it the on a whole wheat flour is usually going to be about 14%. But on like soft wheat flours or pastry or cake or stuff, it might only be about 9%, right?
Oh, okay,
So
there you
they're
go.
much lower in
Yeah,
protein.
yeah.
Some all-purpose, like if they're using retail flour, the all-purpose flours are blended with soft flour in the U.S. In Canada, it's a split run type of stream, but generally speaking, they tend to be around between 10 and 11% protein. Right?
Okay.
So a little bit
But there's
lower
not much of a
protein.
huge fluctuation like 10% from one flour and 30% from another
No,
flour.
there's no big differences.
No
It's
big
basically that for the most part, you're looking at this 10 to 14% range, right?
Yeah,
That's it.
right.
Um,
So
it's interesting
is
that
it
this,
is why do they want to do this? Is it because wheat seitan is a highly sought after, highly digestible protein?
well, that's the funny thing. It's more for the texture, I think, because on the digestibility, there is what in the protein nutrition spaces they call it the PD-CAS,
Hmm.
and that's an acronym. It means the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score.
Oh, what does
So
that
the amino acids are the structure that build up the protein.
mean? Right?
And egg albumin, or egg the solid part of the egg white, is the highest, most digestible protein in terms
Uh-huh.
of a protein source. So that is considered one, or think of it as 100%, right?
Oh, okay.
100% of the albumin powder is digestible
Absorbed.
as protein.
Right.
Wheat, unfortunately, it does provide great texture for things like textured vegetable proteins and mock chickens and so on, but the PD-CAS score is zero point 0.4. That means for every 100 grams of wheat protein, you're only getting 40 grams of
7%.
digestible protein, right?
Yeah.
So that's where things like
That's not
whey
like
and
the best.
soy
Yeah.
are usually are used more preferable because they're 85% digestible.
So whey and soya, how much?
85%. So 0.85. Yeah. So
Wow.
much higher, right? You get much higher scores that way. So the big part of the textured vegetable protein industry, such as the famous Beyond Meat and Impossible Burgers, and that are mostly comprised of soy protein, a soy protein isolate, where it has been the processors have isolated the actual protein from the soy flour, and they've treated it in that process through washing, whether it be with water or alcohol or other distillates and stuff, to allow it to perform and behave in a certain manner, so
Mhm.
that when they extract it or extrude it, that is, that gives that soy protein, that textured vegetable protein, as people like to call it, it gives it that meaty texture, so
Mhm.
that I swear, the first few bites, you can't tell it's not meat, right? I mean, after you chew for a little bit, especially if you know that's what you're sampling and you're looking for it, but otherwise you cannot tell it's not meat at the first couple of bites. And it's growing in popularity also with flexitarians, because that just reminds me just now is that I've seen some television ads here in Canada where one of Canada's larger meat companies is selling a 50-50 now, where you can buy hamburgers and all kinds of things that, ground up type meats that are half soy or vegetable protein. They just say vegetable protein. They don't. I mean, I'm sure in the ingredient listing it tells you, but in the ads they just say plant-based protein and meat. So people are looking for ways to reduce the meat intake in their diet because of the saturates and things like that. And in some cases, it's a great direction. In other cases, doesn't always work as well, right?
And it also depends on your perspective, right? If
Yeah.
you're vegan, you look at this really differently.
You don't want anything from the animal, absolutely.
No, but if you're like one of those Gen Zs, which I see a lot of Gen Zs because I have Gen Zs in my family, my kids are, they just don't want, they just don't want to be cruel. Like they want to have sustainable
sustainability is the big
reasons to consume, right?
That is the biggest driver with Gen Z is sustainability. So
sustainability, and that's why we'll be the first adopters of the new technologies that we see, like lab-grown meat. They will be adopters of those quickly, because they will know what is the job of these sustainable proteins in the future of the environment. So I see the biggest advocates for these kinds of food trends and food combination coming from, the younger millennials and the Gen Zs.
Yeah.
So it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's got to do with the production of the protein, so that when through the plant, there's far less plant material needed to obtain, say 20 pounds of protein. But if you need 20 pounds of beef, you have to use 5 times as much plant protein to feed to the animal first before you can gain that 20 pounds of beef.
Exactly. So mathematically, it does not make sense. Yeah. And the younger generation are actually more intelligent on that.
Yeah. And then of course there's the whole environmental impact conversation with that, because the cows expel methane and things like that, which is harming the atmosphere.
Well, we don't have enough data on that. I have to admit, we don't have enough data on that. But it's just the whole thing about sustainability, and now that social media is so transparent, and they see slaughterhouses, they see how animals are being kept. They have this immense empathy for growing animals on a mass scale for food, right? So I see as we head towards a direction of transparency with social media, I see a more kinder, a generation that wants to treat its animal well before it's slaughtered, even though we eat it, right?
Yep.
I mean, they want to see farm raised, free range. They want to see organic, they want to see all this kind of proteins, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of debatable stuff on that we could do a whole hour or two on. Right?
I know. We keep on discussing that, but I see that as a key trend coming up. I see proteins as a key trend. I don't think, like, do you remember when gluten-free came onto our radar screen? It was like a little bleep, right?
Yep.
And nobody took it seriously. Nobody. Okay. And the rewards went to the innovators that took it seriously and ran with it and lost some money in the beginning, right? You're talking about Udi's, you're talking about Canyon Bakehouse, right? And they succeeded, right? From being the entrepreneurs who believe in that bleep in that radar screen.
Yep, that's it, exactly.
So if you're an entrepreneur and you're seeing a bleep, believe in that, right? And I'm saying that this little bleep, this high protein thing is not going to go away. It may have went away 10 years ago with the Atkins diet, but this time it's not going to go away because there's all these other factors supporting it. Social media has a lot to do with it.
It's the same with egg replacement. Same thing.
Exactly.
Not just protein, but also functionality of eggs, and whether it be for vegan or whether it be just reducing the reliance on animal production, right? And so there's so much being done with pea proteins, with lentils, and flaxseed and things like that, in trying to replace these functionalities for eggs. So to your point, as the entrepreneurs who stick with it and figure these things out, they're the ones who are then first out of the gate when it's not if there will be another avian flu, it's when there's another avian flu.
Right.
Because we remember what happened last time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, devastation. Devastation happens when your sanitation methods are not up there, So it's one of the things where, now that everything is more transparent, everyone's looking, I think the eating habits and the buying habits are going to be so different from boomers, So, yeah. So talking about gluten-free, wasn't there a question on cassava?
Yes, well, there was a question on cassava. It wasn't so much related to gluten-free. We talked about it a little bit last week. Is that the member who is from Nigeria was asking about using cassava flour in his white pan bread to be able to substitute some of the wheat flour for cost savings. And so there's some, I conversed with him there a little bit. We talked about how it's really not beneficial because he's losing out on the gluten, and the starch binds differently, cassava, which is a tapioca flour. Our other member, Ziva, came in with some good suggestions is to use a soy flour. With the soy flour, not only is it lower in cost to help sustain that, it will provide some protein. It'll provide some lecithin to help with emulsification, and it's much higher in water absorbency because it can absorb about 100% its weight in water in making a dough. So there is much greater savings potential by adding only 5 or 10% soy flour. Even 5% soy flour would make a huge difference in cost savings that way, because the pandemic has wreaked havoc on the commodities in Central Africa in terms of accessibility to it, and they've skyrocketed in price. Right?
Wow.
And so that's
what I wanted to ask. Why would you use cassava flour?
Yeah, it's just for cost right now. That's all, because they have access to cheap cassava flour there, and they're having difficulty getting access to wheat. And Africa is not a big wheat growing nation. They have to rely on it coming from Canada, and some of it possibly from the US and or Europe. But Canada is a huge exporter of wheat, and that has all been hampered by the pandemic situation because of, even could the product somehow be contaminated, or just the crew having to be quarantined before they can go on shore to deal with things or stuff. So
everything to do with the supply chain, employees. Can't get enough employees to work,
and I've noticed it myself firsthand, not as a commercial baker, but just because, as you are aware, I've just moved to Nova Scotia, and bringing my belongings from the U.S. and everything, there's been a lot of delays, right? It's been a long time in finding a driver who has tested negative for twice at least in 2 weeks, and so on. And so we've been here since October, or we've been in Nova Scotia since October, and we just finally got our belongings about 2 weeks ago, right?
Oh my gosh!
And so it's been interesting. But we also had a circle back on ascorbic acid a little bit, which again, because you had that amazing seminar on enzymes and extending shelf life yesterday, which was really cool. Keith is
so many questions
of information.
Acid, and Keith explained it so well.
Yeah. And Lallemand is a great company to work with. I have a couple of friends who work for Lallemand who are just excellent people, right?
Yeah, I've met almost the entire technical team, and they are all so talented and also capable of solving any and all kinds of problems. So I'm very impressed with that team as well.
Yeah.
And you're interested in the video
from yesterday. It's going to be available on Baker View next week when we
Perfect.
post it. Yeah.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Yeah. And it was one of the things that Keith helped affirm is within our conversation is the usage levels, right? I mean, you know,
that's a problem too. People tend to overdose on ascorbic acid, you know?
Yeah, there's no legal limit. The good manufacturing practices recommend a maximum of 200 parts per million. But if you put more, it's not going to hurt you or anything, but it's just really not going to be effective.
Well, my question is why are you putting so much?
Exactly, yeah.
Are you getting really that weak of a flour?
I kind of wonder sometimes if they're overdosing because they can't weigh it properly. I really don't know.
Overdose it sometimes. I have no idea.
Most of the suppliers sell it in a dilution of either 5 or 10%. And so that to make it easier, so that like if you want to hit 90 parts per million on a 50 kilo bag of flour, it's really just 45 grams.
Right. And you know what, folks out there, if you have any questions on dosing ascorbic acid, which Mark and me have tons of experience and tons of not to do's, ask us on the forums. Ask us if this particular level is suitable for what you're doing, you know, but you need to be precise with your method, with your kind of flour, you know, and your ingredients. And
the more details, more specifics you have, the faster we can get you an answer.
Right. We don't want you to overdose on those things. It's not fun, and you're wasting money.
Yeah. And you know, having said that, you know, I'd encourage everyone who may be watching our Forum Friday today or watching it on Baker TV to please, if you were at the seminar and you have further questions or want to dig deeper into the questions that you had at the seminar, post them in the forum. That's the ideal place for us to have the conversation, because you know, then you've got 1,500 people who are either experts or just as curious of that. We can create this conversation and it becomes alive that way, and we all learn so much more from everything together that way.
Absolutely. And you're right, we have 1,500 members now. We've grown quite a bit.
and also another milestone one to mention, I posted an attachment of the new Be a Better Baker poster. And so if you want to print that off for your office or share it on your social media, go to the forum in the open discussion area. And the Be a Better Baker poster is just a fantastic resource, showing all of the resources that Bakerpedia has in terms of the resource categories, the link to those categories, a descriptor of what it's about, so that you can be a better baker. And that's because that's what we're all about, right? Yeah. It's almost a bit of a tongue twister.
Be a better baker. All right, folks, that's all for today. And we will see you next week back on Forum Friday. And then if you have any more questions in the meantime, just post it at forums. Mark's there.
All right.
Okay.
You all have a great weekend, everybody. Look forward to conversing with you on the forum.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye.
Bye.